Please welcome to the stage Morgan McCunn, Rebecca Friedman, Brian Anderson, and Jason Bosco.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our panel on powering unique shopping experiences. All right, so as you guys heard this morning in a lot of our keynote talks, being able to compete in this highly competitive commerce space is really, really hard for many of our merchants. So Shopify's goal is to really try to offer as many tools and opportunities for our merchants to be able to differentiate themselves from each other. So today we're going to be talking about how we can do that with some of our tools. And I'm the product manager for custom storefronts. So I oversee our Storefront API, our SDKs, and anything built on top of those, basically. And we have a number of really interesting use cases that you're going to hear about today about how these folks are using our tools to do just that. So without further ado, I'd like you guys to introduce yourselves, please.
I'm Rebecca. I'm a development manager at Shopify, and I lead the engineering team that works on the Storefront API and all of the SDKs built on top of it.
And I'm Brian Anderson. I'm the CEO of a Shopify Plus agency called ShopElf, and I'm also the founder of a new, otherwise stealth startup called Nacelle, which builds a headless framework for PWAs.
Cool. And I'm Jason Bosco, VP of Technology at Verishop. We're a super early stage multi-brand e-commerce retailer. In fact, we just launched yesterday publicly. We've been in business for about 6 months now. Our CEO is Chief Strategy Officer at Snap, and the other co-founder is from Amazon. So we're trying to be the destination for branded products in a couple of years from now.
Amazing. Well, welcome, folks. Thank you so much for joining me up here. So let's first start with, tell us a little bit about why you decided to build on top of our tools. And so maybe we'll start with you, Brian.
Yeah, so I think we've seen this trend over the last 5 years where mobile is becoming a bigger and bigger percent of traffic. And it sort of started maybe 40%, then 50, then 60, and now with our merchants that are growing quickly, it's 80, 85% seems to be the norm. And we started to think about this. I think there are ramifications to mobile being so heavy. I think generally the web across the board was made for the desktop, and we sort of use these CSS queries to narrow it down into a mobile experience. And I think along the way, everyone's growing so quickly, we never really asked, wait a minute, is this actually the right technology to power a mobile experience? So with all this traffic coming in from, say, Facebook and Instagram that's mobile-based, think about your Instagram feed, right? This is really optimized for the mobile experience. It's reactive. The page never has to reload. So a potential customer might see one of your merchant's products, click on it in Instagram, and sort of be transported to this jarring experience of the web where everything you click on has to reload. And it's a bit of a disservice to the customer because now, subconsciously, I don't want to click around. It's a discovery deterrent. It's really hard for me to understand, the full context of your catalog. And so we looked to the Headless API, the Storefront API, and we started to build PWA technology that would essentially rock that scenario where, okay, I'm coming in from Instagram, and now here's an experience that's made and tailored specifically for a mobile device.
So can you talk a little bit about PWAs, because maybe not everybody in the audience knows what that means.
Okay, so a PWA is a progressive web app. And there's many benefits of it, but for this conversation, I think the real one is the fact that your page, it only loads once. Your whole storefront only loads once throughout the shopping experience and never has to reload again.
So you're using the JavaScript by SDK or the Storefront API to build
Storefront API.
Storefront API to build your PWA. Very cool. Jason, what about you guys?
Yeah, so our strategy was informed by, so our front end is all React, custom built up to the point of checkout. So we hit the cart API to add from React components, we hit the cart API, and then Shopify's cart API, and then once they hit checkout, we then land people on the Shopify checkout experience. Mm-hmm. So for us, at our core, we're a retail e-commerce business, so we're in home, beauty, apparel right now. And the way our strategy works is, though at our core we're a standard, online retailer type business, we have the baseline of, your product detail pages, your product listing pages, your search, etc. We're then trying to build a differentiated layer on top of it, which is still in the works. We'll be rolling it out, several of those over the next coming months. But we wanted the flexibility to be able to build custom things on top of the core e-commerce experience. So with that flexibility, of course, you need to custom build things. And what we didn't want to then extend that to is also custom build a whole e-commerce platform, because that is a hard thing to do, which we actually did at my previous workplace at Dollar Shave Club. We custom built the whole stack, so it is a lot of work, and that's a subscription business. It's a slightly different thing, so we had to custom build it at that point. But here, given the nature of the beast, we decided to use a product that's well established in the market, like Shopify, and focus on things that differentiate us on top of it, and so that we have the flexibility and we could hire staff to be able to build custom experiences to differentiate our business from the rest of the retailers out there.
Amazing. I think that word flexible is really key here, and you said it a few times, but I think that's what we're trying to enable, is that flexibility to build those custom experiences, as you mentioned, so that you can differentiate yourself with Shopify at the core and helping power the checkout experience as well. Great. So how does this architecture of this flexible architecture really help you or the merchants that you work with, specifically as a development organization? Brian, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we kind of got into it because of this demand from our merchants for a better mobile conversion. I think,
right.
The phenomenon that we were looking at was this thing called the mobile gap, where desktop conversion rates are really high, desktop AOV is really high, but mobile conversion rates and mobile AOV is maybe half or less. And so this idea of, wait a minute, not only is the conversion rate low, not only are the sessions shorter, but now we can't get our branding across to new customers that come in. And so, we started looking at it and say, well, how can we really support the brands of merchants that are on Shopify? Right? So.
What about you, Jason?
Yeah, for us, one of the things that we did launch with is we call them tastemaker shops. So essentially, influencers on different social channels can curate our catalog based on a subset of our catalog on their store, so they can pin these products in their stores, and so they have a destination that they can send their audience to on our platform, which is a subset of our master catalog. So building something, again, that's something that's not standard e-commerce, that's a custom thing. But then again, once from that storefront, if you click, or from a tastemaker shop, if you click add to cart, at that point it falls through the standard cart API. So being able to build something like that, I think we had to go down the custom path. But that's, again, one example of additional things that we'll be working on using the carts and the storefront APIs as the foundation.
Great. Is there anything you want to add to that, Rebecca, about the flexibility of the architecture?
Yeah, I think what we're really talking about is Shopify being plug and play. So if your product is CMS focused or brand focused or on some weird surface, all of a sudden you can easily plug in e-commerce. So I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, and just to clarify, our team is named Custom Storefronts, and oftentimes people associate storefront with online or mobile or brick and mortar, but I think the word storefront can extend beyond those traditional landscapes. It's really any customer interaction point can be a storefront, right? Cool.
Yeah. Actually, on the point of plug and play, what I found interesting was, given that we're using Shopify's APIs, it helps build an architecture that's modular, versus if we were to build all of that ourselves, again, you'd be tempted more and more to build bespoke things, like, for example, the tastemaker shops that I was describing. It's nice to have that abstraction of, here's a cart. You interact with the cart in a standard way, and having an API, well-defined, structured API, make sure that you're building things that are completely independent of each other in a decoupled way, versus building the entire stack fully integrated, which again sacrifices your flexibility in the long term.
Yeah, I think what we hear about a lot is microservices, right? So everybody wants to have these specific microservices to help support one part of the experience, or perhaps one part of your business. And I think that flexibility really supports that microservices architecture as well. But all of these words that we're using often relate to headless commerce, which is a term that we hear a lot of today. API-based development is not necessarily anything new, but this new term of headless commerce has really caught a lot of buzz, and we heard about it today in our keynote talks. And it's certainly not for everybody, but it has been for some of our merchants here. So Jason, do you want to touch on a little bit of what headless commerce means to you?
Yeah, to me, it's being able to use, like I was saying before, it's a standard set of components programmatically, and then so the head part is what the consumer sees. So I think of it as you can build as many heads as you'd like, but your core platform is headless. So we saw this in the CMS space, so headless CMS is, so we actually use Contentful, which is another platform. It's a headless CMS platform versus your typical drag and drop type interface. So I think in different verticals in the software space, people are moving down the headless path, which I think it all comes down to, again, I'm saying this a couple of times, but flexibility, in that you have core things that you can then build abstractions on top of that are unique for your business. So, and applying that to the commerce space, I think is wonderful. In fact, at DSC, that's something that we were trying to do internally, is to have isolate our back-end systems from so we custom built the commerce platform. We were trying to build internally take it or use the same mold of, there's a standard set of APIs, and then we could build custom storefronts.
DSC is
DSC
dollar
shaped club. DSC is dollar shaped club.
Yes.
Yep.
Cool.
I think you put that really well, like the separation between the front end and the back end. And you can think of the GraphQL as sort of this information highway that connects the two, right? And so now I can have all these different interfaces, and really our imagination could run pretty wild about what those interfaces could be. But I think PWA is really a really good first chapter in this book.
Anything you want to add to headless commerce? What does it mean to you, Rebecca?
Man, I think that's it. It's really about decoupling. Yeah, you nailed it. It's like
Decoupling the front end and the back end, put shortly. There
exactly.
You go. Okay, so then headless commerce. When does it not make sense to use headless commerce or a headless architecture? Do you want to give that a?
Yeah, so I think if you're new to commerce, it's maybe not the best plan. There's a lot of extra time up front because you're building so much from scratch. Shopify has amazing tools that you can use to get up and running so quickly. You can set up the online store super quickly and just start selling, right? So if you're trying to figure out product market fit, if you're trying to figure out what your products are, I don't think it's necessarily worth the upfront investment.
Fair enough.
Yeah, agreed. Perfect. I think as a merchant, when you're starting, you really want to figure out, you don't want to do too much. You want to figure out maybe your core competencies and your 2 or 3 marketing strategies that you're really good at as a merchant that resonates with your brand and your brand's personas. And so headless commerce might be a bit of a distraction maybe, but once you really figure that out, I think headless commerce kind of gives you like the rocket ship you need to just take off once you really figure out those strategies.
So you work with a number of different merchants as one of our partners. Has there been anybody that you said this is maybe not, you don't need to name names, but I'm curious if you've ever had to say, this is maybe not the best approach for you right now?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough, right?
Yeah. I think if you don't have a certain amount of traction and you're still testing the waters with different strategies, it's maybe, at least PWAs, that's maybe not quite right.
Right.
If you have like an Internet of Things company that you need to support as an agency or something like this, then maybe it is right off the bat because you actually need that infrastructure to power your system.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'd also say going down the headless path definitely comes with a cost, meaning that you need to hire engineers to then build the head for you if you're going down the headless path, and that's you need to hire front-end engineers. The front-end ecosystem is changing, and you have to think about maintenance there. So it is a lot of heavy lifting, which again, to Brian and Rebecca's point, is if you have a business that's so early that you're trying to figure out product market fit, this is probably not the best time to go invest in building your own custom storefront at that point.
Totally fair.
The framework that we've made really will help agencies that are finding merchants that have that product market fit.
Right.
So it'll reduce the risk for your deployment if you want to use a PWA for your merchant, and it'll make your life a little easier because we kind of work through a lot of the tricky technical things. So hopefully more people can use it.
So let's talk about the benefits then. So if it's the right path for you and you go down this route, what are the benefits of a headless architecture? We talk about flexibility, and we talk about a disadvantage being the time to get up and running relative to Shopify's online store, for example. But once you've made that investment and you've started on this headless architecture approach, what are the benefits that you'll see from it?
I think the number one thing is actually, even though conversion rates, like, we have a case study coming out that's really exciting, which we talked about.
Right.
So, the main KPIs that we're targeting, conversion rate and AOV, right? And so, maybe you get 65% increase in AOV. This is, mind-blowing for a company, right? And, conversion rates for the first few that we deployed here were over 65%. So really great. But to me, it's actually branding. For a merchant that's coming in, a merchant's customer that's coming in, they're exploring the brand for the first time, being able to do discovery and being able to actually seamlessly take the time to consume the copy and the imagery and maybe form a relationship with the brand off that first visit, I think that's where the real potential of headless lies.
Yeah, and I think it's also having, especially with single-page apps, it's also the seamless transition between different screens. That's a nice thing.
Right.
That people have, coming to expect more and more these days, because everyone is moving down the path of single-page apps, and it lends itself. Single-page apps again lend themselves well to server-side rendering. Again, so you could cache at the edges, so serve content from servers closer to your end customers. So performance is a nice thing. Then in e-commerce, again, performance ties very closely to conversion rates and revenue. So being able to hyper optimize your product to your target audience is a nice benefit that you have.
So can you speak a little bit to, Jason, the unique experience that you're trying to build at Verishop through this type of architecture?
I should say a lot of it is still under wraps. We're sequencing it out for the rest of the year.
You just publicly launched it yesterday, or announced it yesterday.
That's right, yes. So we're super early stage, or just started operating.
Right.
But a couple of things that I can share, like, is the Tastemaker source. We have a whole slew of things planned around that. We believe that humans are becoming a brand themselves. People are becoming brands themselves, and we're trying to help the human brand succeed by giving them shoppable experiences. I mean, you see that in just recently I heard YouTube launched shoppable interfaces within videos where I think they launched it into the makeup category, where you can shop makeup as you're looking through makeup videos. So that's interesting. So there are more and more of these, and of course Instagram stores. Like, I feel like commerce is now making its way into content more and more, and some of the things that we'll be doing through the rest of the year will be around those lines. Embedding commerce more into content. Yeah, and also into the brand of human influencers.
Fair.
Yeah. I think not necessarily commerce as a whole, but the big picture of just using the web to get information out. I was watching this interview with Larry Page, and he was describing this scenario where he was in a car, and it was really bouncy, and he was trying to do a Google query on his phone, and it was so frustrating, he just gave up. This is Larry Page, right? Okay. So the overall idea of, hey, it's actually really hard to get information, extract information out of your mobile device is really an interesting one, right? And so I think as a web as a whole, like, we need to do better. With commerce, it's particularly painful because we're not just asking Google a query and getting a response back. We actually have to do things like discovery and consume a brand and complete a transaction. So I think this is like a really important concept for headless. If we have flexibility and we can have many different heads and many different interfaces, then we can reach the customer in all sorts of different ways that maybe we can't even foresee saying on the stage right now.
Right.
But in the future, we know there will be, more interesting experiences, and by getting Shopify in front of those customers too, being powered by the Storefront API is a really strong thing to do as a brand.
So let's talk about those future experiences that you alluded to. We've heard a lot about, an online website. We've heard about mobile, which is obviously a really big trend that we're seeing right now. What do you guys foresee as a really exciting experience to move into in the future? Maybe not necessarily for your brand right away. Perhaps it's not until later. But I mean, maybe let's start with you, Rebecca. What's something that's really cool that you're excited about moving into?
So we actually have a Unity SDK that gives you base commerce functionality that you could drop into a game built on Unity, so something that's either for mobile or desktop. We have a few games using it now, and I think this is it. I think in the future, everyone is going to want to be selling merch in-game, because the best time to sell to your users is probably when they've just leveled up, when they're on a happy path, when they achieve something great. And when they're already thinking about the brand and thinking about the game.
And so your background is also, you come from the gaming
industry. I also used to work in gaming, so I'm pro gaming all the way.
Fair enough. But that's a very good point. And yes, we do have a product that helps people build into games, but at the same time, it's definitely an industry that we're seeing a lot more interest in. With you see Google launching their brand new live streaming for gaming with Stadia, and what that experience has evolved to beyond just in-game shopping experiences, but there's entire audiences watching other people in video games. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes from a gaming perspective. Cool. Brian, what about you? Future.
Yeah. So kind of piggybacking on that example of hey, it's kind of hard to buy, I'm a big believer in self-driving cars, and I think that will radically change the transportation industry. But I think in the process, it kind of opens up this opportunity where, well, what am I going to do now on my commute to work? And so I think that's a great opportunity to maybe
shopping on your commute to work.
Yeah,
that's dangerous.
So I was thinking a scenario where okay, gosh, I have to rush to work, and maybe I forget to shave, and my beard's feeling really scratchy, So I'm gonna call my Google self-driving car and get into it, and I'm greeted with an AI that's communicating with me. The interface is actually voice. And I can ask a query like, hey, what stores are available that could ship me beard oil to my office in 5 hours, right? And so I'll say, oh, great, and I kind of land on a Shopify store, but the store itself is actually presented to me through Google Voice.
Right.
And so I could find the product that's perfect for this, and actually buy it, and maybe now with the Shopify fulfillment, I can get it in 3
delivered.
hours.
There you go. Wouldn't that be nice? In terms of shopping during your commute, I think for me it would be grocery shopping during my commute would be great.
Totally.
Getting my groceries out of the way on my way home.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, it's at my house when I get there, but I think that we're probably a little ways away from that. What about you, Jason?
So I've been thinking about. We were just talking about this at lunch today. I feel like retail started out as it's an old space, needs innovation, and so everyone's doing e-commerce. But I feel like we're coming kind of full circle where I've been fascinated by marrying some elements of e-commerce within the retail experience. Mm-hmm. So, I've been thinking of it would be wonderful. It's not sure if we would do it, but it would be wonderful if you walk into a retail space, it's more about the experience, because what you don't get online is the tactical, how does this feel type thing. So your retail experience has now become more of a providing you that tactical experience, but it's a limited set of inventory and maybe just one of each on display.
Right.
And then I think I've seen this in one store, but taking it a step further is then you have a digital storefront within the retail store where you say, hey, okay, I'm interested in this, and if you see other variations that are maybe not in display, and then you could directly send it to your trying room, and you walk in and it automatically shows up there, and once you say you like it, then you go back to the same retail display and you say check out from there. That could be another headless, but behind the scenes it'll be talking to the the storefront API, et cetera. But it's e-commerce, but in-store e-commerce.
And maybe I could just take a picture of a product and it charges me and I walk out.
Yeah.
Very cool as well. I mean, it's one of those things where you want to enable commerce where your customers already are, right? And a retail space, a physical retail space where you're already driving customers to, sure, they can go up to the cash and check out with a cashier, but there are potentially other interaction points, right, where you can get that customer and get them coming back. We are hearing about like smart mirrors are coming up in a couple of different flagship stores nowadays where you can get product recommendations in the change room itself as you're trying on a piece of clothing. And again, if they don't have it in store, then maybe you can have it shipped to your house. So it's all these interesting opportunities for engaging with your customers in a space where they already are, right? And trying to see if you can get them to convert in a certain way. So there you go. All right, well, we're gonna open up the floor to questions. So let me see. If you guys haven't already, you can submit questions in the app. We do have a couple here. All right, thank you so much. Okay. So the first question that we have here is from Philippe, and his question is, can we expect native PWA in Shopify for merchant sites? We can see problems with apps if it's not part of the core. Interesting. Rebecca.
I feel like this is a question for you. This is a product question.
Okay, is it possible? Let's start with that.
Yes, definitely. I think it's something we are thinking about is, should we be building React components? Should we be making it easier to build PWAs? How much of this should we leave to our partners, and how much of this should we be doing in-house?
Right.
So I would say everything is on the table right now.
Yeah, everything's possible, right? Especially when you're dealing with an API. So I mean, that's a great question, and I think ultimately, it would be wonderful if we know that PWAs are the best converting experience, if we make that super easy for all of our merchants to build that type of experience. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's definitely something we're thinking about, as Rebecca suggested, or as Rebecca stated, and we're trying to figure out how we can work to make it an easier build for you folks as well. But then we also have what Brian's working on, for example. Some of our partners are trying to help build or make it easier for you to get a PWA up and running, right?
Yep. Can I add a
Please.
vote to that?
Yes.
And so I found a similar approach so we also use Algolia in our custom storefront for search and powering our PLPs. And they have, though their core business is search, they've built like React components for powering the search, like the category filters and the search as well. Of course, we had to customize it for our use case, but it was nice to hit the ground running when we were building prototypes early on. So a data point for you to
Yes,
consider.
yeah, no.
I
We
think
love all the data
we
points.
use Algolia too, and we use Vue components to build that out for our PLPs. So, but I think sort of the point of headless commerce and the whole idea of it is I'm sort of not tied to assumptions that are made on the front end. So I think having some components is really great, but really a framework that kind of lets you minimize the risk of the deployment and all this is what's really interesting. So I love the idea where maybe Shopify says, hey, for the checkout, here are some awesome components that you can use that are PWA powered.
Right.
And then that might integrate with the custom stuff that a merchant or an agency wants to build on behalf of a merchant. I think it's a great idea.
I think we also don't want to push everyone towards PWAs if they're not right for their business. I know you do, but
That's not true. I say no.
Yes,
There we
yeah,
go.
you heard it, he said no.
yeah. So if we're just pushing everyone towards PWAs, then PWA is really just like online store version 2, and we want to make sure that this space is open to any sort of IoT, any other platforms that make sense for your business. Sometimes native mobile apps are the right choice for different businesses too.
Yes.
Yeah, and it doesn't replace native mobile apps too, just so everyone knows. I think it's actually works supplemental. So if you look at the data out of Pinterest, when they deployed their PWA, their native app installs increased significantly. So I think it's actually supplemental.
I didn't think I heard that. That's an interesting fact.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, so our next question is from Robin, and the question is, has API latency affected how you have architected the headless stack?
No, it's crazy fast. I don't know how else to say it. Like the point of GraphQL is that it's faster than the REST API. You're only requesting the data that you need, and because you can kind of stitch resources together in one API call, it's actually faster.
I would say it helped inform some of our decisions in that we, especially around rate limits, we were planning to use the admin API for some portions because of the rate limit on the storefront API. So those are some trade-offs we had to consider, but I think the rate limits actually helped us make good decisions so that we weren't abusing the APIs for things they weren't supposed to be used for, so which is good. So I think it worked out.
Yeah, I don't think we see that many different merchants actually getting rate limited. In terms of performance, it's hard because GraphQL is new. So we're hoping that everyone will sort of get a handle on GraphQL and realize that one of the benefits is that you just ask for the information you want. And again, you mentioned this, but I'll say it again. You can get a lot more information stitched together in one query, so you're reducing the number of round-trip queries you're making, and I think that has a huge latency improvement.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning our API is just a GraphQL API. There is no REST version of our API, and so we're obviously moving towards that direction, as you guys heard earlier today. But Shopify is trying to build as many resources as we can to help you get up and running on this new architecture as well. But we do think that it will help performance at the same time. Great. All right, another question from Anonymous. How do you manage complexity effectively when you're not bound by Shopify's rules like you are when creating a bespoke theme?
Is that for, who's that for? Rebecca.
Managing complexity effectively, not bound by the rules of Shopify themes.
I think that's for you.
Yeah.
I think that's a client-facing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the answer for any software system that you build can become sprawling and complex. So I would say the standard things that you look out for when building a software system, make sure things are simple, make sure you have clean interfaces defined, make sure you have your interfaces tested, etc. I think that applies in this case as well. Sure, and then you want to make sure e-commerce has been around for a while now, so people expect certain experiences, which is why even when we launched, we still have a product detail page, a product listing page, search experience. All of these are standard things that people have come to expect, and maybe not break the mold too much when you're launching. And so that's from a consumer perspective, and the rest of it, again, similar to software development. Simplify, clean up the mess that you make typically when you are about to launch.
Says the man who just went through a big
launch. Did you give this same speech like 4 hours later?
I was saying, pay down tech debt. Don't let it become a huge thing.
Yes.
There's a great analogy that I recently read, which is it's similar to once you cook. You want to make sure that you don't leave your kitchen in a mess, so that all the gunk starts collecting, and it becomes so hard over time that you can't cook anymore. So go back and clean your kitchen so that you can actually cook more stuff in it. That's the equivalent of tech debt. It's from a Martin Fowler article that I read. So I think the same thing applies to building a commerce software as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
I think it's really, of course, at Unite, this is so appropriate because I think one of the strong points of Shopify is this ecosystem that we have of apps. And for us, one of the challenges while we were building out this framework was how do we integrate all these different apps, especially apps that work within the front end, right?
Yep.
So kind of easy for us on the back end. That's someone else's responsibility. But on the front end, how do we get all these apps up and running? And so our framework actually includes a pre-built integration with 22 different apps now. They're the most popular that we've seen in the ecosystem. And so whoever asked that question, I think it was an anonymous one, but
yes.
Let's talk, because I think we might be able to reduce your risk of execution.
I also just want to touch on something Jason mentioned. Even if you're not just building a theme, you can still look at all of the whole layer of abstraction that Shopify's created and that e-commerce has created. I think that's what you were getting at. So you don't need to invent completely new concepts and grow your complexity. You can still think of things as being a product or a checkout or different other organizational tools that will help you just keep it in check.
Perfect, thank you. So that's it for questions, but I'm sure that we'd all be happy to keep the conversation going. So if any of you folks want to chat about Headless, chat about PWAs, chat about the launch that Verishop just went through, I'm sure you can reach out to any of us. If you want to keep the conversation going with me specifically, please reach out in the app. I'd love to hear about anything that you're building on our platform. And thank you so much for attending, and thank you very much to our panelists for their input. We appreciate it.